Welcome back to the channel, guys. So I decided to make a set of videos targeted towards people who are starting out in photography, and this is more to help them out with some of the biggest questions that they'd ask when one was starting out with photography. Kind of sort of like me. I never really had anyone I could go to when I wanted to ask these questions except the internet, and you get a lot of mixed answers. So hopefully this can help answer some of the big questions beginners have in photography. So in this video, our main topic is about choosing a camera. So if you're a beginner that's decided that you want to get into photography, and the first thing you do is look into getting a camera, or maybe you already know that you want to get a DSLR, but when you do a Google search, you're overwhelmed by the different brands, the different camera models, and all this terminology, right? So what is the best camera for a beginner? And the short answer is that it's any camera that would fit your budget. It's not really a satisfying answer, right? So we're going to go the long route. We'll go over available options, and hopefully we can help you find what best suits your budget and your needs. So in this video, we'll talk about accessible options. You may not need to jump into getting a DSLR or a mirrorless camera just yet. And then we'll talk about our two main options, which is a DSLR and a mirrorless camera, an MILC. We'll also touch base on sensor size and talk a bit about brand and why that's important. So first off are our viable options, or available options. Now you may not, as I mentioned, you may not need to jump into getting a new camera straight away. You might already have a camera that you can already use. And the first item on the list is the camera that you may already have, which is your phone. Now mobile phones are amazing now. I used to take photos with my phone, and even when I've moved to a DSLR and to a mirrorless camera, I still use my phone for taking videos on YouTube. A lot of my videos on YouTube were done with a phone. So we're going to break down a bit of the pros and cons here. It's going to sort of be the format of this video. So the pros are you already have the phone. So there's nothing else, you don't need to spend anything, right? You carry it wherever you go, and mobile phones have some sort of Pro mode, which is similar to the manual settings on cameras, on DSLRs, right? The best thing, aside from taking photos, it can also take videos. As I mentioned, it's amazing for videos as well. The cons, though, is that it's got a fixed lens. Whatever is put on the back of the phone, that's the lens. You can't change that, right? It also has a fixed aperture. Because of how things are built and engineered, if it's an f2.8 lens on the camera, on the phone, that's it, you're stuck with that, and you usually can't change the aperture on the phone, on the lens of the phone. And probably the biggest drawback is that it most likely performs terrible in low light situations, just given the limitations of the technology of the sensor size and all that. Still, they take amazing photos. Hey, a bird just passed by right in front of me. All right, so our next option would be compact cameras and bridge cameras. Now, compact cameras are small, almost pocket-sized cameras, which are sometimes called point-and-shoot cameras, because you take them out of your pocket, you point it, and you take a shot, and you're done. It's sort of like a step above from your cell phone. Bridge cameras they're called bridge cameras because they're supposed to bridge that gap in between a compact camera and the DSLR. It's supposed to be an in-between there. Now, bridge cameras and compact cameras, people usually have them. It's usually that camera you take with you when you go out on vacation, you're on a holiday, or you've got a special occasion you want to take photos of. It's usually that camera you have at home. So if you have a compact camera or a bridge camera, those things work. They take amazing photos, and pros and cons for that would be, well, first of all, compact cameras are small and discreet, almost like a cell phone. It'll give you better performance, better than a phone, and you know, they most definitely have manual settings, especially for bridge cameras. The price may be affordable. They can shoot video, and I think one important thing is they may have an option to shoot in RAW format, especially for bridge cameras. RAW format, if you compare it to like film, in film you have like a negative, right? A roll of film. You have your negative. In digital, when you shoot in RAW, it's just like a digital negative before you have you process it to get an image. Actually, DNG stands for digital negative. Another topic for another time. But in terms of the cons, high-performing models for compact cameras and bridge cameras can cost as much as an entry-level DSLR or mirrorless camera, sometimes even more. They have a fixed lens. The beautiful thing about having a fixed lens on these cameras, though, is it's a zoom lens. You have a range that you can zoom in and out of. And they may have a fixed aperture, but for bridge cameras, more often than not, you can adjust the aperture settings. So even if it's a fixed lens, the aperture, you can still open and close that depending on what's built into the camera. So we've talked about our viable options or available options. We're going to talk about our two main options, which is a DSLR and a mirrorless camera. Now, these are two different technologies that have more than a few similarities. Getting one of these are commonly attributed to that first step in taking photography seriously. But of course, that isn't necessarily true, though. You can take photography seriously with whatever camera you have. Now, in terms of similarities, they both have interchangeable lenses, which is important. We want to have that ability to change our lens because the lens affects our composition, image quality, and all that. They share certain technologies, such as the focusing systems that they use in all these functions and modes. And they both may have video functions, especially mirrorless cameras. To put it simply, these are two different technologies that do the same thing. Now, let me just move this back here. I feel like this thing's a bit too close. All right. Now, just slightly, there we go. Now, in terms of differences, a DSLR stands for digital single lens reflex, right? It's got a mirror mechanism in there, and mirrorless is MILC, or mirrorless interchangeable lens camera. It makes do without that mirror. So how does that affect you as a photographer? So a few things. When you look through through a DSLR, when you pull it up to your eye and you look through that viewfinder, you're looking through the lens of the DSLR through a mirror mechanism. So the light enters the lens and bounces off a mirror mechanism called the pentaprism, and that's what you see. That's what you're seeing there. And one thing you have to know is that what you see isn't what you get. Although you're looking through the lens, the settings aren't dialed in. They're not baked into what you see. So you have to be able to read the built-in light meter, the histogram, and get, in order for you to get an idea of what the final image may come out, or what the final image would look like. Damn. So there. But the pro is looking through the viewfinder does not consume power. So, yeah, compared to a mirrorless camera, it saves power. When you press the shutter button, that mirror mechanism flips up and it exposes the sensor, and everything from there is pretty much more or less like a mirrorless camera. I'm skimming through a couple of technicalities and oversimplifying it, but yes. Now, in terms of the mirrorless camera, as I mentioned, the mirrorless camera makes do without that mechanism inside the DSLR. So you have the lens, you've got a mirror mechanism, the light goes in, bounces up, and that mechanism flips up and down. So a mirrorless camera makes do without that mirror mechanism. So why is that important? Because when you look through the viewfinder, which is now an electronic viewfinder, it's the same as looking at the back of your screen from the camera. What you see is more or less what you get. The camera shows you what the image will look like based on the settings that you have. So it's easier or faster for you to know as a beginner, like, okay, when you dial in the settings, this is what it's going to look like. Now, generally though, it uses more power because it's giving you a readout from the sensor all the time. And looking through the viewfinder, it's not mechanical, it's electronic, so it does eat up some power. So generally, you get fewer shots for every full battery charge. Mirrorless though is relatively more compact to its DSLR counterpart. To give you an idea, a mirrorless full frame camera would probably be the size of an APS-C DSLR. That's a smaller sensor size. We'll talk about sensor size in a moment. So, cost-wise, they have the same price range from entry-level to pro options. DSLRs tend to be more rugged because of the construction, and I'm not saying mirrorless isn't as rugged though, but DSLRs do seem to be more tougher. Mirrorless does have an edge, as some say it's the way to go because it's a way to future-proof yourself. And personally, I go for a mirrorless option because all the features it would have built in. It's just amazing. I've shot on a DSLR, then moved to mirrorless, and that's where my bias would be. In terms of sensor size, so we're going to talk about just for a bit, because it is something that you need to consider as a beginner. Not something you really have to dive in head first and really get into. So a lot of the information we'll cover won't be 100% complete, but it does give you an idea. So the factor to consider about sensor sizes is, well, first of all, sensors take the place of film. So with film, when you shoot on film, you have 35mm film on those film cameras, and on digital, full frame sensors are the equivalent. They built the sensor to be the same size as the film. So yeah, so that's sort of like the standard, but you don't necessarily have to get a full frame sensor. We'll be talking about the three most common sensors, which is micro four thirds, APS-C, and full frame. So micro four thirds being the smallest of these sensors and full frame being the largest of these sensors. So why does sensor size matter? So larger sensors generally perform better in low light. Also, larger sensors generally or relatively produce better images, and that's for a number of reasons. This is why a 24 megapixel DSLR, even if it's not a full frame, if it's APS-C, it'll produce relatively better images than a 64 megapixel camera. It's sadly, no matter how good these images on a camera get, on all these different camera brands, they are amazing. And they're coming close to DSLR-like images, but because of the limitations of the physical sensor, there are some things you can't really work around. But a larger sensor does mean a few things. It means that you're going to need generally a larger lens, and a larger sensor also means you're going to relatively have a larger camera body. And these things cost more the larger you go. So with that in mind, we're also going to talk about brand. And I want to start this section off by saying that there is no one brand better than the other. And I don't want to get into that whole brand loyalty discussion. And personally, I find that part of the photography community to be quite toxic. So what is important to mention is that whatever camera you buy, you'll most likely be sticking to that brand for some time. So consider the following when you're purchasing a camera: what sensor size you're getting, what lens options do they have, are they offering for that sensor size. Also, do you want to upgrade to a larger sensor in the future? Why? Because generally, lenses from a larger sensor can be used on smaller sensors within the same brand, depending on the mounts, of course, as well. And you can mix and match brands as well if you have the proper adapters. But that's for another topic for another time. So in a sense, you can future-proof yourself by getting full-frame lenses. Not the best option, but if you do plan to do photography for a while and you do plan to upgrade generally later on down the line into a full-frame camera, well, it could be an economical option. Some brands, though, may not have the path you want to take. Some brands may only make micro four thirds sensors, micro four thirds cameras, and others may not have like a full frame lineup. Like Panasonic, their Lumix cameras, I believe they only make micro four thirds. And another example is like Fuji. Fuji makes APS-C cameras. They're amazing, but they don't have a full frame option. They actually jump ahead larger than a full frame and go to a medium format, which is a lot more expensive. So something to consider. So in a summary, like I mentioned from the start, the best camera is whatever would fit your budget. So much can be done with a phone nowadays, and you might have a camera that you don't really need to upgrade right away to a DSLR or mirrorless camera. But if you do end up getting a mirrorless or a DSLR, they have all these features and modes. The main thing to remember is that the three main settings controls will always be the same, and that's shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. So I hope this video has provided some clarity, some answers, in helping you decide what first camera to get. And I hope to make more videos like this in the future, and I'll see you around in the next video. Bye.